Alright guys, you're welcome back to this particular video. In this particular video, we'll be jumping straight to CSS, right? And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, like and leave a comment, and so that you don't get to miss in subsequent videos, right? So as we proceed with the crash course. So the first thing I want to do right now is to leave this particular basic.html and basically create a new document, right? A new CSS file. Now let's just call this one let's create a new file here, and this because we want to treat CSS or something, so let's just call it custom, right? Let's just call it custom.html. Doesn't really matter what you name it, just name it anything. And let's get our basic structure as usual, and we want to get our basic structure by starting with exclamation mark like this. So with exclamation mark and we hit enter on our keyboard, VS Code just give us auto-generated custom. Now let's not call it custom, I changed my mind. Let's call it login instead. So let's call it login.html. Alright, login.html seems nice. So if we do it like this now, we can just go ahead and continue. So we'll come over here, let's call this login, and we'll save this. So once we do this now, we can run it as usual on our browser to see what we've done, right? But for me to do this now, I want to show you guys extension. So VS Code on its own as a text editing software, right? It's if you click over here, you will see the extension where you can actually see several extensions that you have in your VS Code. Now, extensions are things that actually extend the capabilities of your application. Just think of extension like that. So there's a particular extension called Live Server, so that's it here, Live Server. So I already have mine installed. For example, I have this particular one installed, so Live Server. So once you search for Live Server over here, once you click here, you search for Live Server, you click here too as well, then you can actually have your VS Code installed, right? Just click here and you see yours installed. Yours will be installed. Why mine is uninstalled? Because I already have it installed. So just click on the button and you should be able to install this particular extension. So once you do that now, the reason why we install the extension is so that we can come over here, go back to our file section and right click here. Once you right click now, you'll be able to open it with Live Server, right? So that we don't go on our system and click on open with and select a browser. So if it previously we will do something like this, right? We'll go to this login here, I will say right click, we'll say open with and open with our default browser, right? So I don't want us to do that basically. So I just want us to have like this Live Server. So once we right click now, we're able to click on open with Live Server, and once we have that open on a Live Server, let me bring it automatically. It will just open inside of your system just like this, right? So I have this installed open like this. So this is it. So it will just open like this. So let me just go ahead and minimize this too as well, so that we could have it just side by side. Let me even drag this a little bit. So I just want to split my screen here so we could have these two things side by side. So in such a way now, if I come over here and I say H1 for example, and I say learning CSS, right? So learning CSS, and I save this, it will just automatically show here without me coming over here and reload it. So this is quite amazing, a quite beautiful way to actually just write your code and see it implemented almost immediately. Now let's continue. So having done this initial setup, let's go ahead and start learning CSS. So what exactly is CSS? So CSS stands for cascading style sheet. Like this is spelled this way, cascading style sheet, right? So CSS is not a programming language, and CSS is a style sheet, just as the name implies. Just like how HTML is not a programming language, HTML is a markup language. So in this video, we are going to be learning some of the basics of CSS and see how we can get started with CSS. Now, for you to learn CSS, one of the first things that you need to know is the property, the syntax, CSS syntax. So let's treat CSS syntax. So if I come over here and say CSS syntax, right? So what is exactly a CSS syntax? So CSS syntax is always like this. We're looking at property like this, then value. So this is value, let me spell it, then semicolon. So this is the syntax of CSS. You want to know that CSS starts with property and it has value. Then property colon, value, then semicolon. So this is all you need to know. So once you just know this, you automatically know CSS. In HTML, this is like knowing tag. Now when we treated tag in the previous videos, I said that tag is noted with the angle bracket. You can just open and close tabs using an angle bracket. So in HTML, we treated just tags all the way through, while in CSS, we'll be treating property all the way through. Now, just talking about properties a little bit, we also want to see how we can actually get started with CSS, right? How we can add CSS to our working document. There are three ways we could add CSS to our working document. We could add CSS via the inline CSS. We have what we call the inline CSS. We have what we call the external CSS. Then we have what we call the internal CSS. So with this inline CSS, external CSS, and internal CSS. Now let's say internal before external. Yeah, so these are the three different ways we could actually add CSS into our project, our HTML project that we already have, right? So that being said, let's just go ahead and start adding these things. So we'll start with the inline CSS. So let me delete this. So if we want to add an inline CSS, for example, we'll add an inline CSS using the style tag. So I will come over here now and say style tag. So if I say style is equal to in quotes, this will allow me to add inline CSS. With this, right now, I will be able to add my CSS property, like property will come inside there, colon and semicolon. So let's put value. Our value will look like this, right? So with this now, we should be able to add our first CSS. So let's learn our first property. So the first CSS property that we'll be learning will be called color, right? So for example, if this is color, the value could be red. So let's say red now. So I'll put red here and I will save it. The moment I save it now, you see now that this particular text now is now what? Is now red color, right? So we've written our first CSS, right? So the style tag here allows us to add inline CSS, while this color here is a property of CSS, and this value here, this red here is a value of this particular property called color. So this could be anything. This could be green, right? The color will change to green. This could be blue. The color will also change to blue. Now this will give us the ability to actually add CSS into our document, right? So let's try another inline CSS again. So I can come again and put paragraph p tag and say this is just a paragraph text, and I will save it, and I can come over here and say style, and in our style here I can say property yet and value, of course. But of course the property that I want to treat now, we want it to be what color as well. So color on its own, this property could not just only be named, it could come in different color code, like hex color code. For hex color code, you start with hashtag like this, then you can now say like 6 numbers. It could be like 990000. So if I save this now, this will give me like kind of red. Let me change this 99 to like FF. So this will give me a kind of red, right? And if over here, VS Code have the ability to show us like different color code that we want to use. If we come over here now, we'll click here, so this blue, you could see now that is this particular color code here, and it's going to be blue. If I just hover again, I could change it to probably something like this. This is like cyan color, right? And if I save it, it's going to give me something like cyan. So this is different ways we could also add colors. Apart from this color too, if we click here and click here, we have other like the HSL color code, we have the HWB color code, we have the RGB color code. Now sometimes I love to use the hex color code and the RGB color code, right? So this is the RGB color code of purple. So these are all different ways to add color. So we'll call this an RGB color code. R stands for red, green, and blue. The highest of this value can be 255, right? And this is hex color code, and we just specifying the name of the color. So these are several ways you could actually change the color of a text in CSS, and just by adding some inline CSS. So now that we've learned inline CSS, let's learn something else. Let's learn internal CSS, right? So if we want to learn internal CSS, we'll make use of the style tag. So we'll come over here inside our head section, and our style tag must be in our head section, right? So we'll just have our style here, and we could just easily save it like this, right? And the syntax for this is a little bit different. For internal CSS, we want to introduce a new syntax to the CSS. We start with what? A selector. So we have a selector like this. We have curly braces. We have property, right? And we have value. something like this, right? So, but these selectors now can be divided into three. We have three different kind of selector. We have the tag selector, we have the class selector, and we have the ID selector. So we'll be treating all of this stuff. So let's start with the class, with the tag selector. So tag selector is like this, a tag, like HTML tag selector. So let's start with the P tag now. So let's say P, and let's give it the color here. Let the property be color and let the value be red, and we'll save this. So if we save this now, without us specifying an inline CSS, if we just come over here and type a paragraph text and say this is another text, for example, and save this, and oh, I didn't spell this well, and save this, you will realize that as long as it is a paragraph tag, even if it is multiple, the color is going to be red, and just one of these will control everything. So if I come over here now and say, okay, I want a purple instead, so all my paragraph tag is going to be purple. So let's try on that tag. Let's try like heading tag, right? Let's try like HT tag, right? Let's say this is a this is a heading, right? Let's duplicate it now. You could say that we just upgrade it times 3. You could say that this is heading, right? So let's say we want to make all of this heading red. So we have to come over here now and say, using inline CSS, we have to come over and say style, color, and red like this. It's to make the first one red. So to make the second one red again, we have to do the same thing here. We have to do the same thing in the third place, so and say red, then those three things will be red. But if we want to achieve this same thing using inline CSS, we don't need to repeat ourselves like this and like this and also like this again. We don't need to do that. All we need to do is to come over here and say style all my h3, that's h3 here is our selector, then curly braces, then the CSS properties I want to add to this particular one is color now, and I want to say let it be red. So by doing this, without having all of those stuff, you could see that all of the h3 tags are actually red. The same way that this one is purple, we can choose to change it to something else. Let's change it to green. Right, so that is how you can just use one particular line of code to style multiple things using inline CSS. So basically that is how inline CSS work. Now that we've seen how inline CSS work, let's take a look at how external CSS work. For external CSS, the file has to live outside that particular HTML document that you want to add your CSS to. So let's just come over here, let's get a new file. Let's just call it, for the fun of it, let's just call it style.css. So we have style.css here, and we could just start specifying our CSS, right? So what I would do is I'll just copy all of this thing now. Let me close this. I'll just copy all of this thing. I'll come over here, I'll paste it. Now, just notice that I copied everything here without the style tag, right? And I'm here and I just pasted it here and I'll save it. So now, if I delete everything here now, you realize that all of the CSS property that made this one green, that made all of this text green, I made all of this text green. I also made all of this heading text too also red. It's no longer there. So because of that, they are back to the default color, which should definitely be black. So once we have something like this now, you could see that when you come back to your style.css, this is just all we have. So because of this now, how can we ensure that this external CSS affects this particular login document? Now it's very simple. We'll make use of another tag called the link tag. So the link tag allows us to include external CSS. So the link tag has two HTML attributes: the rel attribute that has the style sheet and the href attribute, right? This href attribute now includes the file location. So I could have something like this. I could say style. I'll just type style.css, which is this exact one, and I'll save it, and by so doing, that particular CSS is also taking effect inside this particular document. So just to recap a little bit, so with this now, we've been able to learn the 3 different ways we could actually add CSS into our working project, right? Internal CSS, we're using the style tag. Inline CSS, sorry, we're using the style tag. Internal CSS, we're using this. Inline CSS, let me repeat myself. Inline CSS, we are using the style attribute. Internal CSS, we are using the style tag, and external CSS, we want to write it outside in an external file, save the file as .css. Then we want to link it as what with the link tag, right? That is how we can actually add CSS. So now that we've learned this, in our subsequent videos, I'll be showing us how we can actually start using CSS to create some amazing styles, right? As we continue with the crash course. Now, don't forget to subscribe to this particular channel so that you don't get to miss out on subsequent videos. And again, we have like an online bootcamp course that you can also enroll for, that 8 weeks, that will have a professional like myself to mentor you and guide you in your front-end web development career journey. Check the description on how to actually enroll for that particular 8 weeks online bootcamp. See you guys in the next video.